My name is Chris Bennett. This is a sculpture of Lee Gobble. Lee Gobble was a clothier and a friend of Fairfield and an enthusiastic promoter of Fairfield for many, many years. He had a clothier shop on the west edge of the square in Fairfield. Last year, he died at 101. When I grew up around Fairfield, I knew of his clothier shop and probably went in there. I left for a time and I came back to set up a studio to create another monument for Fairfield. And since 1979, I have created many monuments all over Iowa, the Midwest, and the nation for both private and public review. I knew Lee when I came back. We became as good of friends as anybody was good friends with Lee. He was a very gregarious person and enjoyed people in the public. A few months ago, after Lee had passed away, I was contacted by first Ron Blair, then I talked to the mayor, and then I talked to Susan Kessel about the opportunity to do a sculpture of Lee Gobble. I was really glad to do that because I knew Lee and I enjoyed him. I didn't know all the facets of his life, but once we got to talking, there were many things that we learned. That he was quite a prankster and just a overall kind of a, what do you say, theatrical type person, I suppose, on an amateur way. So we not only decided to do a sculpture of just Lee, but we thought of things that we could add to it that would tell his story. One of the things that was mentioned was he helped to put the steeple back on the tower of the courthouse. One day, a few years ago, when that tower was put up, he was standing outside the Civic Center and he put his hand up like this, and Susan Kessel was standing there. She's part of the Art Association. And that stance kind of rung, it was etched in her mind a little bit. So when she thought of a sculpture of Lee, she thought of him presenting that tower. That was one of his many things that Lee would have done in a lifetime. He was a friend to a lot of people. For instance, we'll put a Hawkeye button here, something I've made up that looked like a Hawkeye button, and the Fairfield Trojans button there. Apparently Lee took great joy and pride in taking young children or their children and their parents to football games. He just wanted to do something for people and enjoyed doing that. And that was one of the things he did. And he always had a good word for people, but as well he was kind of a prankster. He'd do things that are kind of offbeat. I remember I didn't know this at the time, but he used to carry a telephone in his pocket, hidden, not quite like this, but then it'd be wired inside. And he had a ringer. I even have it in the clothing over here. You can hear it. He'd ring that ringer and say, "Oh, you have a telephone call." And there would be no one on the other end, of course, or the governor is calling you, things like that. His name was Gobble, so he enjoyed anything turkey. So I think we'll put a turkey feather bow tie. He liked bow ties. And we're going to have the drawing here, you'll see, has a spray of, he had a collection of ties. He's a clothier. He had a collection of ties. And those ties will be sprayed out like a male turkey. And on that, they'll be made out of ceramic tile. And we'll put those tile around the back side of him, just like a male turkey, and tilt it up slightly. And on those ties will be colorful images of Fairfield and colorful images of the things that were important to Lee. Everything from his grandfather's store in Abington that was moved to Fairfield. It was a mercantile and clothing store We'll have that on the tie. We'll have the courthouse. We'll have all sorts of interesting images on that tie that you can see as you go around the sculpture piece. There's the Parsons logo. He is a big promoter of Parsons College, where he attended for a few years anyway, and he said he played football. Who knows what he did. He had lots of stories. He had lots of collections in his house, as well as his ties. They even have the tie collection on display and selling those ties to people who want to support this project. One of the way I start a sculpture, there are several ways. I could start it directly life-size by bending steel with heat and building up clay, and it's very heavy and on a big turntable. Or I can start small, then enlarge it. I decided to start small and then enlarge it because it had been better for this atmosphere and not quite as messy and not quite as dangerous with a heating torch and so on inside of a public hall. We decided to hire models. We asked for people that were from late 60s to in 70s to come and interview as a model. We chose, I think, 5 out of 5. We decided everyone who was just right would use them. One man came who was particularly well suited physically and age group was a man from West Des Moines or Urbandale, somewhere in that area. So it had been a long drive. He had relatives here he could stay with. But so he came once, and he came once or twice, and we took photographs of him that I could work from. Then there were several other people that were modeled. There ended up being 3 people actually. So I had them stand on a turntable. You'll see the turntable back behind me that has the mannequin on it, and they would stand in briefs, kind of a swimming brief, and stand there, and they were his body type, his height, and his age group. I could get an idea of how they would stand or slump or whatever they would do, and I built up clay over a aluminum armature that's held up by this brace inside. Aluminum armature, I bent it each angle of each joint 2 or 3 different ways, and measured it proportionally to make it so it looked like a real figure in there. And then I built up the little egg shapes over the each area, whether it's the calf, the thigh, the hips, the shoulders, the arms, the head. Then I started to finish that, and I used anatomy books, then I used photographs of the models, and I finished it anatomically first, because I want to make sure that the figure, the real life figure, pushes out the cloth, and you know that there's a real body in there. And so all the drapery is hanging from the high points of the different forms of the figure. What I did after the models were dismissed, I took some of Lee's actual clothing, his pants, a sweater, a jacket. I even have his glasses somewhere, and his bow tie. And I've dressed the mannequin. I rang the ringer in his pocket because that makes the pocket bulge out, and I put that right into the clothing. I had to know how the cloth would hang and the folds would come away from the high points. So I've used that extensively, and I'll use that again when I make the life-size figure. Then I used photographs of Lee, many photographs. Here's an example of a photograph that I've used of his face, and I worked and worked and worked his face the best I could from different angles. And I also used anatomical books. I didn't really have any pictures of the back of his ears, but I wanted those to be just as important as the rest of his face, because it's a sculpture. It's 3-dimensional. And eventually, and here's these bald spot on the back of his head, little hairs will go across there, all these little details, and his hair is somewhat curly, so I have to kind of work that a little bit. And eventually this week I put the glasses on. Now the glasses, they're kind of backfilled behind the rims and the bows and behind so a mold can come off of that easily without getting hung up and cling together the two parts of rubber that will go on this. Speaking of, and here's another detail, by the way. He's got 3 candy kisses in his hand, if you see those. He would go to someone, a young lady of course, would you like a kiss? And he'd give her a chocolate kiss. That's why his shirt is unbuttoned there, the collar flipped up. He'd do that in order that a young lady would come around and adjust his collar for him. He was kind of a ladies' man, or at least he thought he was, and I guess he was. The next step with this, when I finish it, I'm finishing the base right now, making sure that it's round and the right proportion. It's about 1/3 to the height, and it won't tip, and it'll look correct. I will make a big crate. This will be the bottom board of my crate, and I'll build up stick walls and then bracing in between the walls with foam and bracing like this, and then I'll encase that crate with plywood, and so it can't move in there. And I will take it to a foundry. The foundry happens to be in Golden, Colorado, where I have another piece that I'm doing of Lou Henry Hoover for the city of Waterloo. And I'll pick that up and give them this piece. What they're going to do is they will section off this piece. They'll probably take the hands off like that, and they'll put them on the table to mold them separately. And they'll paint rubber over this whole thing, and then they'll have a plaster or probably a plaster shell with burlap over the rubber, so they can take that plaster shell off. Then they'll razor cut the mold so they can flip that off. Then they'll put it all back together again. This gets destroyed. It's for the next project, this clay. Inside that mold that's big like this, they will paint, it'll be 2 halves, and it'll be the impression of this. That's what saves it. It'll be the impression of this. They'll take that mold and they'll paint wax in that mold at about 3/8 or 1/4 inch thick. And then the mold will be put together, then they'll slush more wax into it so all the seams are covered up from the inside. They'll take the mold off and they'll retouch the wax. The seams will have little fins on them they have to take off and make sure there's no bubbles. So all these little details are intact. That wax copy, which is still this size, will be will be molded once again. A gating system with sprues and a cup and sprues and a vent in wax will be placed on this, and another refractory mold. That means that it can withstand high heat, made out of plaster, made out of ceramic shell. It'll be put on that wax copy of this. All the wax will be melted out and then molten bronze poured in, and then that mold is chipped off the cooled bronze, and you'll have this rough casting of a figure like this. Probably a whole thing plus hands, 2 hands, and with the gating still on it. And it has to be cut off. Everything has to be finished, and some clever guy will be able to re-detail with a hammer and chisel all the little details and so on, and weld back on the arms. And then eventually it'll be given a patina which are nitrate salts, and give it colors, maybe dyed, probably his handkerchief here will be painted red, white, and blue. I'll do that with dyes, and the Parsons logo will be green. I'll do that with some dyes as well. And this piece, this 24-inch piece, will be will be in the collection here at the Art Association. In the meantime, the person that made the mold will also put it together, and they will put foam inside, a hard foam, and you'll have a 24-inch in foam. That piece will be sent to another company that has a scanner. It's a CNC scanner, just like if you were rolled into what are those called for the doctors use to scan your bones to see if you have a tumor or something. They will put the foam copy of this on a turntable, and they will scan it from all directions, and probably 5 axes, all directions. That will be fed into a computer. Then they will enlarge in the computer. They'll with axes and vectors. They will enlarge that to life size. It's over 6 feet tall. And then they will feed that information to a router and a big block of foam that has a steel armature in it with the exact same configuration. And that little router will just spin and spin and spin and spin and spin and cut a figure just like this out of what the information from the CNC scan is fed to the computer. It'll cut out the exact image, life size, but it was in foam, lightweight, on a steel armature. That piece, that's not cheap to do that. That piece will be sent back to me. I will set up another turntable like this. You'll see that this turns, it's on rollers. Of course this turns. But I'll have another turntable like this, and I'll set up that foam blank on an armature. And it'll have the folds in foam just like this, but it still has to be retouched. There'll be areas like underneath the coat, and there'll be a lot of areas behind the ears, by the way, that it won't have picked up. And I will have to refinish everything with more wax on top of that, or cut out the foam, then refinish it, make sure everything's perfectly. And I have a system such that I can take that whole foam piece, I can turn it upside down, and I can look at the soles of his shoes so I can make sure everything's just perfectly, so it looks like he's standing on his feet. I mean, in fact, I did the toes and did all the details here, because when I put the clay on to make it look like leather, I wanted to make it look like there are feet inside there, so it had the right bulges in it. I'll do the same thing by being able to turn it upside down and seeing that everything's uniform. Even when I look at this, if I can get way down here, I can see if one jaw is lower than the other, or cheekbone, and the same thing if on the life size, if I can turn it upside down, and it's very easy when it's lightweight like that, then I can make sure everything's uniform. Same thing with the feet and so on. So I'll get that all finished. I have to build another crate up around that. It's very fragile, but somewhat heavy. And it's all braced with foam inside that crate, foam and sticks, 2x4s or 2x2s. I load it up. It's not heavy at that point. The crate is heavier than the piece. The piece might only weigh about 50 pounds or 75 pounds, even though it's life size. It's got a very little bit of wax over top of foam. I took a piece to the foundry last fall, and I'd done it directly with a steel armature and heated the steel armature, and it was I didn't put any foam inside on top of that armature, just little crosses of wood, and it was all solid clay. It was very heavy. I suppose I was hauling maybe a ton with the crate and the figure inside, and it bounced around. It didn't make the trip that well, but I reclaimed it once I got to the foundry. But this one will be light. I've sent some of these things clear across country, lightweight on a pallet, and never got damaged before, just because of the crating system that I use. The foundry will do, once again, they won't make one big mold on the whole thing. They'll make sections this time. They'll make a section on his leg and his foot. They'll make a section on say, this part up to here, where there's a cut line where you can't see the welds. They'll have that as a section. They may have a section just for the base. They'll have sections, of course, for the arms. And they'll have a section for the head and the chest. These are all big molds like this, bigger than the body. And they'll do the same thing where they'll paint wax in it, and they'll go through the whole process of making the refractory mold and melting out the wax, and then the cutting off the gates and refinishing. And this time it's a lot more refinishing and it's a lot more welding, because you have to put all these pieces together. They don't always line up, and sometimes you have to be creative. You might have to jack a piece out with a hydraulic piece where the wax shrunk maybe like this, and the metal got cast like that. Well, that's not going to line up to the next piece that didn't shrink, so you got to push that out and then tack weld it, and sometimes you have to tack and cut and push and then recut and then retack, and so all your joints will fit right, and pull. Maybe you have to clamp and pull things together, or clamp them down to the table so the heat of the welding doesn't make things warp. And it's quite interesting and a lot of work. I've done all of that myself, and I've had a foundry where I was located in Fairfield on the southeast side of Fairfield years ago, and then I worked in foundries, and I'm glad I don't do that right now. It's just so much work. I'd rather do the prototypes. I like to do only what I do best, requires my fingerprints and my mind. The rest of the stuff with the foundry work, lots of people can do that. But only I can do the concept, and only I can have my touch. The life size will be cast. It'll be finished and patinaed, given a patina. Then I will re-dye the different areas that I think should be colorful. I will go out there to help with the patina, and to color it and dye it and to crate it and to bring it back. Just like in a couple weeks, I'm taking this out, I'm picking up my other piece. I'll spend time out there with that piece for the finishing. Once I bring it back, the plan is to have a big flower planter, maybe 12 feet long and 6 feet wide. The plan so far at this point, that planter would be outside of the Civic Center. On the east side of the Civic Center, there's a rectangular area out in the front lawn, directly in front of the courthouse spire that Lee helped to put up. So he'd be standing, his base, his concrete base will be in the middle of that planter, and probably daffodils planted in that planter. There'll be the concrete base will be about 4 feet in diameter. It'll come up to the level, to about 2 feet to the level of the stone planter. It'd be kind of random stones planter, random limestone that we'll get from Weber Stone Company in Anamosa. Then up from the top of the planter, it'll come up with white Portland, and then the back side of that white Portland will come up about 2 or 3 inches. So that's where we put the tile, and inside the tile there'll be a space for about 2 foot around, and that's where the sculpture will be installed, inside that center space. So the tile will be put on by Alto Design. They're incorporating making the ceramic tile, they're buying the ceramic tile and making sure the design gets put on them so it can be heated and fired, and then one of their group will install the tile, and I will install the sculpture. I think the city of Fairfield will make the planter and do the cement work. That's the idea, and I will direct them how it ought to go. Speaking of other people that are involved in the project, we've incorporated 4 artists. I'm the head designer, I suppose you'd say. And there are 3 other people that be working on the project. Once it gets to be life size, I will take the foam head, I'll have it enlarged separately. I'll take the foam head. I might not even use that piece, but might use a wig head. I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to take it to Alabama, where a young man, Ken Rowe, he used to live here in Fairfield. In fact, he was a student of mine. He apprenticed with me for a very short time. He'll take that head and he'll make Lee's image. I'll have photographs. I'll have the life-size foam of what I want, and I'll give him directions, and I'll let him do the piece, because that's what they wanted. They wanted to incorporate other artists in the project. The design for the tile feathers, Mark Schaefer will do that. He's been a long-time friend of mine, and he's a very valuable artist here in Fairfield, and done a lot of work for Fairfield. He'll make, when you approach the sculpture, what you'll see is that fan of ties, and he'll do a colorful detailing. It'll be all imagery, but you won't know that at first, because you'll see the lines, patterns, just like turkey feathers. You'll see it just the way, with the tones, the yellows, the darks, the browns. It'll look like a spray of turkey, but as you come around, you'll actually see the images. So he's going to craftily do that. And as I mentioned before, Harry Alto with Alto Design will be taking his drawing and transferring it to making it work for tile, and laying it out so it'll work for the tile, the actual tile. One of the most important people of this project, that would be Werner Elmker. He is doing the videoing and the constantly of this project, and he has done a good job with stills and also video. And I am on video. I turn one on each side of me every day that I come. When I came to town, I was asked to do a sculpture of William Coop. He was the image that was chosen by the Art Association. William Coop, by reputation or by history of Fairfield, was the first white child, as they say, born in this area in 1836, I believe. He still has descendants here. When I first came, I visited the Bruce Coop farm north of town and became good friends with them over the years, and interviewed them about their great uncle and all the rest of the Coops that had come to this area. They even have the log cabin. They moved it out there to a church out there, the log cabin that originally belonged to one of the Coops way back then. And that was a fun project. Again, with that project, finding details of William Coop. Some of them I stretched a little bit. I gave him he didn't have such a big, long beard, but he had a beard. I don't know that he smoked, but I gave him a little cigarette in his hand because it was typical of the time, and so on, a little rolled cigarette. What I did was I engaged him with a little boy. The reason being, I was in school at the time. I was serving in a 3-year apprenticeship, and I made a little model of William Coop sitting on a bench, this old man with a beard and a hat and cross-legged. And my master teacher, my sculpture teacher who I apprenticed with, he says, an old Egyptian guy, he says, oh, you can't just put an old man on a park bench. What will people think? Put a little child with him. So I says, all right. So I put a little child with a little boy in the current dress of the time, the down vest and the corduroy jeans and the sneakers and a ball cap and so on. And that's how that story started. And it was very well accepted by the Art Association at that time. A few years later, I'm not even sure how it got started. Someone campaigned. They wanted something else. They wanted another sculpture. I says, all right, what do you want? And they wanted children. They wanted children playing a game. And someone said, well, let's have them playing Crack the Whip. Well, that might be 9 children. That's a lot of bronze. So we came upon Leapfrog. So I made a model of 3 children playing Leapfrog. We did a fundraising. The Art Association did a fundraising for that project. And at one point, they thought that they were had match grants that they needed to make, and the newspaper here would match some of the owner of the newspaper would match people's contributions, and there were several matches, $5,000 at a time, so 10,000 here and 10,000 there, that sort of thing. But while we were raising funds for the project, I think maybe we were, I should say they were applying for a grant that wanted to know if we incorporated another artist. So by that time I'd been here a few years, and I had gotten to know some of the other people in town, and I incorporated Dale DeVokie. He teaches at the school at MIU at the time, and he's a very fine artist. And doesn't do a lot of bronze work, doesn't make a difference, but he does very nice figures, very nice pieces. And I asked him to do the front figure. There were 3 figures, one child jumping over another and another waiting for the child. And I had designed it, so I knew what I wanted. I said, Dale, I want you to do this. So he used his little daughter for a model, and it was a beautiful job of this little girl looking up, leaning with her hands on her knees and looking back and seeing this other bigger girl tumbling over and going to come and jump on her or fall on her, one or the other. But I had a very delightful time hiring the children models and having them model for me in swimsuits and arranging their figures, and it was a direct life-size operation with heated steel and then the clay and so on. They're very patient and very good. That was the way we did that project.